The plumber broke the wall, and what came out made me doubt my own son. He didn't even seem to notice the noise. Nolan just kept talking on the phone in the living room while I stood there, frozen, staring at the small safe half buried in dust and plaster behind the bathroom tiles. It had been sealed away for years, maybe decades. The metal was worn and cold, and it didn't belong to me. The plumber, a kind man with calloused hands, stepped back and muttered, "Ma'am, I didn't know there was a safe there. Should I stop?" But I couldn't speak, because I had recognized it. That safe used to belong to my late husband, and Nolan knew. He had to know. If you've ever been disrespected by someone you love, this story will speak to your heart. I didn't sleep that night. I waited until Nolan went out, then sat on the cold tile floor with the safe in my lap like it was a wounded animal. My fingers trembled as I tried the numbers I still remembered from long ago. Our wedding date, the day we bought the house, the year Nolan was born. Click. Inside. Documents. A letter. A deed. Something that didn't just question my trust in Nolan. It cracked it wide open. I wish the wall had never been broken, but it was. That night the house held a different silence. Not the kind that comforts, but the kind that accuses. You hear the hum of the refrigerator like a question. The ticking clock sounds like judgment. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea I didn't want, hands curled around it just to keep them from shaking. Nolan came in, his cologne arriving before he did. The kind that always reminded me of a man trying too hard to impress strangers. "You all right?" he asked, barely glancing at me as he reached for the fridge. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He didn't notice the safe had been moved, or maybe he did, and just chose to act as if he hadn't. Either way, the moment passed like many others had lately, with me invisible and him untouchable. Since he'd moved back in to help out, I'd slowly become a guest in my own home. My curtains replaced, my bedroom downsized. Even the old photo of his father on the mantel had disappeared one day, replaced by a framed certificate Nolan got for some sales award. "I'm meeting Kara tomorrow," he said suddenly, chewing on cold chicken. "We're thinking of redoing the kitchen. It's outdated." Outdated. That word sank into me like a hook. I didn't say a word. Just looked at the scar on the wall where the safe had been, like the house itself was trying to reveal something before it was too late. The morning light hit the papers like truth. I laid them out carefully on the dining table, where birthdays used to be celebrated and Thanksgiving prayers were once whispered. Now it was covered in legal-looking sheets, yellowed slightly at the edges, but sharp where it mattered. The deed to the house, signed in my husband's name. But the surprise wasn't that it existed. It was the note clipped to it in his handwriting, to be given to Marigold only, in the event that Nolan ever tries to claim the house. She sacrificed everything to build this home. I read it 3 times, each word a slow burn of memory and warning. When my husband died, I didn't fight Nolan. I believed him when he said he'd take care of things. I let him manage the bills, the paperwork, even the taxes. He said, "You've done enough, Mom. Let me carry the load now." I thought it was kindness. But now, this. I opened the letter next, a personal one, written to me. My husband's words were tender but clear. He had suspected Nolan's hunger for control even back then. "He's ambitious but cold. Watch your back if I go first, Marigold." I sat back, breath shallow. I had raised a son who would smile at me while stealing the ground from under my feet. The tea from last night still sat on the counter, untouched, now cold as stone. I went looking for the photo, the one Nolan had taken down months ago. It had been on that mantel for years, my husband standing next to a freshly painted porch, paintbrush still in hand, our boy clinging to his leg, maybe 6 years old. That photo meant something. Not just family, not just memory, proof. I checked the hall closet first, behind the boxes of holiday decorations and old coats that no longer fit. Then under my bed. Nothing. I even searched the attic, careful not to step on the loose planks. Still nothing. He'd gotten rid of it. He didn't ask, didn't mention it, just erased it. And maybe that's what hurt most. Not the safe, not the letter, not even the betrayal. It was how easily I could be edited out. How lightly he treated the past, as if it was something to sweep away, like cobwebs in the corners. Downstairs, I heard his voice. On speakerphone, always too loud. "Yeah, it's almost done. She's stubborn, but she won't make trouble. Trust me. 1 more month, and it's all ours." Ours. I pressed my hand against the attic beam. The wood was warm from the sunlight cutting through the window, but it didn't comfort me. I had built this life with my bare hands and thinning hope, and now I was listening to my son gamble it away. The next morning I sat on the back steps, where the wood was soft from years of rain and sunlight. I ran my fingers across the railing, the one I painted myself, 2 summers after Nolan was born. My hands still remembered the motion, the ache in my wrists, the way the summer air stuck to my skin. I could still smell the paint in memory, that sharp, chemical hope. This house wasn't just walls and floors. It was where I carried laundry up the stairs while my knees swelled, where I taught Nolan to tie his shoes, where I waited on nights my husband came home late, smelling of motor oil and coffee. And now Nolan, my boy, was making plans to change everything, to take it. I looked down at my hands. They've grown smaller, bonier, the skin's thinner like parchment. But they built this home. They raised him. They held him through fevers and broken hearts and schoolyard bullies. These hands once fed him, and now they held the evidence of his betrayal. Inside I heard Kara's voice. She had come over early, laughing loud and sharp, the kind of laugh that fills a room without leaving space for anyone else. "Your mom still uses the washing machine from the Stone Age?" She chuckled. No wonder the place smells like old socks. I didn't move, because I had realized something. This wasn't just about losing a house. It was about losing the last illusion I had of my son. When someone betrays you slowly, you don't feel the wound all at once. You notice it in quiet moments, like when your favorite teacup ends up in the donation box, or the spare key you always kept in the flower pot by the porch suddenly vanishes. That morning, I found the key in the wrong place, tucked inside a chipped teacup, pushed to the back of the cupboard, like someone had tried to hide it but gave up halfway. It was the old key, the one my husband and I used to use before we replaced the locks. I hadn't touched it in years, but someone had. I held it in my palm, its weight familiar, like holding a piece of my past. There was a faint green thread tied around it, the same thread I had used years ago, so I could find it in my purse. That thread had been cut. Someone was playing with my life like a set of keys on a ring, testing locks, deciding what to open, what to close. I tucked the key into my apron pocket and walked into the living room. Nolan and Kara were sitting on the couch, whispering over a realtor's flyer. "You didn't tell her yet?" she said, annoyed. "The market's perfect now. If we wait, we lose." My son didn't look at me. He looked at the flyer, and something inside me went cold, like the door to my home had already been opened, and I was the last to know. That evening, I made his favorite stew, not because I wanted to please him, not even to pretend things were normal, but because the smell reminded me of when he was still mine, before money got into his blood like a poison. He came into the kitchen, sniffed the air like a man who still expected to be served, and said, "You didn't have to cook, you know. Kara and I were going to order in." I ladled the stew into a bowl and placed it in front of him anyway. He sat. She didn't come down. We ate in silence, spoon against bowl, breath between bites. But underneath the quiet was something louder, questions I didn't ask, answers he wouldn't give. I watched him eat. His eyes were tired, but not with regret, with calculation, like someone trying to finish a task that had taken too long. When he reached for the salt, he noticed the safe was missing from the hallway. "You moved it?" he asked casually. I nodded. He didn't push, but his knuckles whitened. I sipped my water, feeling the air stretch thin between us. Then I said softly, "Your father left that safe for me. Only me." His spoon froze mid-air. He didn't speak, didn't look up. That was the moment I saw it. Not guilt, not shame, just inconvenience. The stew had gone cold by the time I stood up, but the truth had finally settled between us like steam that no longer rises. 2 nights later, I passed by Nolan's room on my way to bed. Their door was cracked open just enough for sound to spill through. I wasn't trying to listen, but their laughter had a sharpness that made me stop. Not the laughter of joy, the laughter of victory. "She really thinks she's in control," Cara said, muffled but clear. "Let her play house. In a few weeks, she'll be living in a condo with floral curtains." Nolan chuckled. "She'll go quietly. She always does. Just leave her a check and a few photos. She'll pack herself." My knees didn't buckle, not right away. But something inside me folded, like a chair finally collapsing under the weight it's carried too long. I stood there for another second, heart pounding in my ears, hands curled into fists, not from anger, from grief. Because I had believed him, not just this year, not just since he moved back in. I had believed in my son since the day he first grabbed my finger in the hospital and wouldn't let go. That memory now hurt like a fresh cut. I didn't confront him. I just stepped back, slowly, quietly, like a stranger in my own hallway. The next morning, I took down the last of the wedding photos from the wall. Not out of rage, but because I no longer needed reminders of what love used to look like. I needed room for what I was about to become. That morning, I made my bed like I always do. Tight corners, smoothed blanket, 2 pillows fluffed. But one of the pillows smelled different. It was faint, floral, expensive. Not the soft lavender water I sometimes dab behind my ears, but something bold and sweet, too young for me and too familiar for comfort. Cara had been in my room. I stood there, hands hovering over the fabric, a sick chill creeping into my chest. It wasn't just the scent, it was the message. This space will be mine soon. I opened my drawer. My prayer book had been moved. The small wooden box with my mother's earrings sat tilted, as if lifted and replaced by someone unfamiliar with its weight. She had touched my things. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor, struggling to breathe around the knot in my chest. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a battlefield dressed in domestic silence, a place where knives weren't drawn but implied, where smiles covered calculations and kindness was used like a key, only to unlock your final door. That afternoon, I went to the church down the street. Not to pray, not at first. I just needed to sit where no one wanted anything from me, where no one tried to take what I loved. The candles flickered on the altar, and somewhere deep inside me, something flickered too. Not rage, not fear, but resolve. The church calmed me, but the silence didn't follow me home. I went straight to my closet when I returned, almost pulled by instinct. There, covered in plastic and dust, hung the dress I wore to Nolan's wedding. Ivory blue, modest, satin around the collar. I remembered standing in front of the mirror that morning, hands shaking as I pinned my hair back, heart full. Not just for my son, but for the family I believed I was gaining. I reached for it now. Not to wear, just to touch. There was a note pinned to the hanger, small folded pink paper. "You can donate this." She said it's not your color. No name, but I knew. Cara had gone through my closet too. I sat on the floor, dress across my lap, note still in my hand. The words weren't cruel at first glance, but they were a theft, not of fabric or space, but of memory. Of dignity. I had held onto that dress not because of how it looked, but because of what it represented. That day, I thought I had gained a daughter. Instead, I lost my son. And now, they were trying to erase the last soft corners of who I was. I folded the note back, slowly, and slid it into the pocket of my robe. Then I stood, closed the closet door with both hands, and whispered to the darkness behind it, "Not yet. You don't get to take this from me. Not yet." The envelope was cream-colored, no stamp, no return address, just tucked under the doormat, like a secret someone didn't want the postman to witness. I bent slowly, picked it up. My name was written in Nolan's handwriting, rushed, almost careless, like he had written it while standing. Inside, a typed letter. "For your transition, should you choose to move sooner. The condo in Brookside is available. We've arranged everything." A check was folded beneath the page. More than I expected, less than I deserved. No conversation, no kindness, just arrangement. Like I was furniture being relocated. I sat on the porch bench, hands gripping the letter, eyes burning. There wasn't even a signature, just Nolan, as if the name alone would carry enough weight to dismiss a lifetime. This was my payment for raising him, for wiping his fevers and teaching him prayers and staying up nights I don't even remember. This was his gratitude. The wind picked up and tugged at the corner of the paper. I let it go. It fluttered down the steps across the yard and settled face down in the grass. I didn't chase it, I just sat there, rocking slowly like my own mother used to when words failed her. The check stayed in my lap, heavy as a stone. I didn't tear it, but I didn't cash it either, because I finally saw what it really was, a receipt for a mother already considered gone. That evening I stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual, not fixing anything, just looking at the lines beneath my eyes, the tired slope of my shoulders, the gray threaded through my hair like frost. But the part that held my gaze, the part that hurt most, was the silence in my expression. Not sadness, not anger, just absence. For years I'd told myself I still had purpose because Nolan needed me, that even if I wasn't celebrated, I was useful. But now I saw what the mirror refused to say. I had become invisible in my own home, not from age, from erasure, from the way Nolan no longer said thanks when I cooked, from how Kara never asked if I needed anything from the store, from how they spoke about me in the third person. Even when I was in the room, she'll adjust. She's set in her ways. She's lucky we're handling it. That's what the mirror reflected. A woman they talked around not to. I reached up and touched the side of my face. The skin was softer than I remembered. I hadn't really looked at myself in months, maybe years. In the cabinet behind the mirror, I found my old lipstick, Coral Rose. I hadn't worn it since my husband's funeral. I uncapped it slowly, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I put it on. Not for Nolan, not for anyone. Just to remember I was still here. I found the list on the kitchen counter. Not hidden, not folded, just there, like a note left for the housekeeper. To do: change curtains, too dark. Paint walls, light beige, modern. Remove rocking chair, replace dinnerware, tacky flowers. Clear out master bedroom ASAP. No title, no initials, just a list, assuming ownership. I read it twice, then once more, slowly. My eyes paused at master bedroom. That was my room, mine and my husband's. The room where Nolan was conceived, where I nursed him during colicky nights, where I lay beside a man who loved me until his last breath. Clear it out, like dusting off an attic. I sat down, list still in hand. The rocking chair creaked softly behind me, the same one they wanted to throw out, the same one that knew every prayer I had ever whispered at 3 a.m. I didn't cry, not yet, but I folded the list carefully and placed it inside my Bible, not to preserve it, to remember it. Because sometimes the clearest declaration of war isn't a scream, it's a bullet point plan, written in neat cursive on clean paper, and that list told me everything I needed to know. They weren't waiting for me to agree. They were waiting for me to vanish, but I wasn't raised to disappear. I was raised to endure. There's a drawer I almost never open. Third one down in the hallway dresser, where the wood sticks slightly and the handle squeaks. Inside is a velvet box, small, square, wrapped in fading memories. My wedding ring. I haven't worn it in years. Not because I stopped loving him, but because grief changes the way your fingers swell, and because at some point you stop needing the world to see what your heart still carries. But that night, after reading Kara's list and finding Nolan's envelope, I opened the drawer and took the box out like a sacred object. I didn't cry. I remembered. The way he slipped it on my finger, hands trembling like a boy too in love with the woman in front of him. The way he'd tap it with his thumb during Sunday sermons, a habit I'd never told him I noticed. The way he once said, during a fight, "I don't care if we sleep in a tent as long as we built it together." That ring was proof we had built something, together. Not for it to be torn down by someone who saw me as a placeholder. I slipped the ring back onto my finger. It didn't quite fit, snug and tight, like memory pressing back, but I kept it there. Not to mourn him, to remind myself who I was before I became someone's burden. I closed the drawer slowly, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something solid inside me settle. When I woke the next morning, the smell hit me first. Sharp, chemical, wrong, paint. I walked down the hallway, still in my robe, slippers silent against the floor. Nolan stood near the living room wall, roller in hand, white paint covering the old cream I had chosen years ago. My cream, the one my husband said reminded him of morning light. "Don't worry, Mom," Nolan said without turning around. "It's just paint. Fresh start." Fresh start. Those two words hurt more than any insult could. Because to him, a fresh start meant erasing everything that had been ours. The colors we picked together, the furniture that carried laughter and arguments, even the creaks in the floor that told stories when no one spoke. Kara appeared from behind the couch, smiling, holding a color swatch. "We're going for minimalist, brighter, happier, happier." I watched a drop of paint slide down the wall and land on the old rug, the one I had brought from my mother's house before she died. It left a small white mark like a scar. Something inside me wanted to scream, but I didn't. I turned around, walked back toward the kitchen and whispered to myself, "If you start yelling now, they'll call it hysteria. But if you stay quiet long enough, they'll call it power." In the silence that followed, I realized the truth. They weren't just painting walls. They were repainting my absence. That afternoon, I tested the front door, not something I usually did. It was a habit from when Nolan was a boy, always forgetting to lock it, always racing back to check. But today I turned the knob, and it opened too easily. I frowned, closed it, turned the key, then tried again. Still unlocked. I went to my room, took out the old key I had found in the chipped teacup, slid it into the lock. It didn't fit. They had changed it. My heart didn't race. It paused, like it couldn't believe what it was feeling. I tried again. No use. The key I'd used for decades no longer belonged to the house I lived in. I stood there on the porch, sunlight warm on my face, and realized something colder than any wind. If I ever stepped out without telling them, I might not get back in. This wasn't protection. This was preparation. They were preparing for my absence, planning for a future where I wasn't in the picture, just a shadow in the hallway, a framed photo packed away in a box. I didn't knock. I opened the door slowly, granted access this time, and walked back inside. Nolan was laughing upstairs. Kara's voice followed, high-pitched and pleased. I placed the old key gently in the fruit bowl, let it sit there, so they'd know I knew, and so I'd remember. Even locks tell the truth when you're finally ready to listen. It was a small thing, but sometimes it's the smallest things that break you. Kara's shoes, heels she wore only for work or parties, were lined neatly outside my bedroom door. Not theirs. Mine. At first I thought maybe she had placed them there by mistake. But when I opened the door, something was off. My lamp was moved, slightly. The drawers were closed wrong. The blanket folded the way I never folded. I walked in slowly, scanning the space that had once been my last corner of peace. Then I saw it, her scarf draped across the armchair by the window, my favorite chair. The one I sat in to read, to cry, to pray. She had been inside again, not as a guest, but like someone testing the fit of a space she believed would soon be hers. My hands shook, but I made no sound. I walked to the chair, lifted the scarf gently and folded it, not out of politeness, but to remind myself that I still had control over something, even if it was just fabric. I placed it outside her door. No note, no confrontation, just that quiet gesture. Let her understand what it meant. I sat in the chair and stared at the wall, where the light fell in soft patterns from the curtain she wanted to replace, and I whispered, for the second time that week, "Not yet." Sometimes the past whispers louder than the present. I opened the top drawer of my nightstand that evening, needing to touch something that still belonged to me. Beneath old receipts, a hairbrush missing most of its bristles, and a dried rose from my husband's funeral, I found it, a photograph. Not framed, just loose, worn at the edges. Nolan was 9. He had just lost his first tooth and was grinning wide, gap and all. His arm wrapped around my shoulders like he couldn't stand to be apart from me. And I looked tired, but proud. I traced the curve of his cheek with my thumb. Back then, he had called me his hero. He would write little notes, taped to the fridge. "You're the best mom. I'll never leave you. We'll live together forever." That little boy wouldn't recognize the man he became. Or maybe he would. Maybe ambition grows in silence, and love fades where gratitude is never taught to last. I held the photo to my chest and closed my eyes. Then I heard them laughing downstairs again, Nolan and Kara, loud, careless, like the house was already theirs, and they were simply adjusting the lighting. I looked down at the photo once more and whispered, "You used to love me." And for the first time, I let the tears fall, not for what I had lost, but for what he had so easily forgotten. It was a Saturday. The sun was warm, unusually bright for October. I was folding laundry in my bedroom when I heard voices outside, unfamiliar ones. Laughter, footsteps on the gravel path, the creak of the porch swing. I stepped into the hallway just as a woman in heels walked through my front door, followed by a man in a blazer holding a clipboard. They didn't knock. They didn't ask. They acted as if they already belonged. I stood there, frozen, as Kara walked up behind them with that same saccharine smile she wore like perfume. "Oh, don't mind her," she said, laughing. "She's just the owner, for now." The air left my lungs. I looked at Nolan. He was near the window, pretending to inspect something, avoiding my eyes. He didn't stop it. He didn't say a word. My house, our house, was now a tour stop. The woman in heels glanced at me and said, "Is this where the second bathroom is?" Kara nodded and gestured toward the hall. "We're thinking of gutting it, actually. Start fresh. Gut it. Like memories were mold to be scraped clean." I didn't say anything. Not then. I just walked back to my room, hands trembling, heart pounding in a slow, steady throb of shame. The voices continued. They walked through my life like it was wallpaper they intended to tear down. And in that moment I knew this wasn't my home anymore. It was a listing. That night dinner was a formality. The realtor had left, the visitors gone, but their presence lingered like the stale smell of perfume on the curtains. I set the table out of habit, not out of kindness. 3 plates, 1 for me, 2 for the strangers my son had become. We ate in near silence, forks tapping, water glasses clinking. Kara scrolled through her phone, smiling now and then. Nolan looked at his food like it was a business proposal He didn't have time to review. "I think we'll get an offer by Monday," she said finally without looking up. "The couple with the baby loved the porch." The porch? Where I once rocked Nolan to sleep in the middle of summer storms. Where I read books aloud until he learned the words on his own. He said nothing. I didn't ask how much. I didn't ask when. I just reached for the salt, same one we'd had since Nolan was a child, and passed it to no one. They didn't notice, because I had already become background. I looked at Nolan, just for a second, trying to find the boy I raised. The one who used to cry when I left for work. The one who used to ask if angels looked like moms. But all I saw was someone waiting for the table to clear itself. The silence between us was louder than anything that had come before. It wasn't just distance. It was goodbye, disguised as dinner. It was gone. The rocking chair, the one I sat in every night since my husband passed, where I whispered prayers into the fabric, and where silence wrapped around me like a second skin. It had lived in the corner by the window, beneath the crooked lamp he never fixed, beside the shelf where I kept his books. And now, there was nothing. Just empty space. Clean. Too clean. I searched the garage, the basement, the back patio. Nothing. I finally asked Nolan. My voice was soft, too soft, as if I was asking permission instead of a question. "Where's my chair?" He didn't even look up from his laptop. "It didn't fit the aesthetic, Mom. Kara gave it away, some neighbor took it." Some neighbor, just like that. No ask, no warning, no chance to say goodbye to the one thing that had held me when no one else did. I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I just stood there. Because how do you explain to someone that a chair isn't just wood and fabric? It's presence, memory, comfort, proof that you existed in that room. I walked back upstairs and sat on the floor where the chair used to be. The carpet was still pressed down in its shape, a ghost of where I once belonged. And I realized, with painful clarity, they weren't clearing the house. They were clearing me, piece by piece. The hallway carries sound differently at night, softer, like whispers slipping through cracks. I had gone to the kitchen for a glass of water, but their voices pulled me to a stop just outside their door. Nolan's voice was low, clipped, tired. "She's not fighting it. I think she's starting to give up." Kara laughed, short, triumphant. "Good. One less battle. Once she signs, we can close and move before the holidays. New year, new life." "She'll be fine," he added. "She always bounces back." Bounces back. As if I were a rubber ball, not a mother. As if grief and betrayal were things you simply rebound from. There was a pause. Then Kara asked, "Do you think she knows?" Silence. Then Nolan replied, barely audible, "I think she knew the moment I handed her that envelope. She just hasn't said it out loud yet." He wasn't wrong. I had known, not just since the envelope, since the first time he looked at me with impatience instead of love, since the first decision he made without asking, the first family photo he moved, the first time he called it his house. I stood there, barefoot on cold tile, a mother outside her own son's door, listening to her displacement discussed like it was a dinner reservation. I walked back to my room, glass still empty, and for the first time, I let my sorrow breathe, but only for a moment, because my silence was ending soon. In the morning, the first thing I noticed was the shelf above the fireplace. It had been cleared, my wedding photo, gone. The ceramic angel Nolan made in second grade, gone. The little clock my husband fixed every year like it was a sacred ritual, gone. In their place, a white vase with fake eucalyptus, a candle labeled Serenity, and a small black and white print of a tree, the kind you find in home staging catalogs. The house had been stripped of its soul, and still, no one said a word. I walked to the closet in the guest room, where I had quietly started placing what little was left of me. The photo albums, my knitting basket, a scarf that still smelled like my husband's aftershave. It was all slowly being boxed by my own hands, as if I was preparing for exile. But then I found the angel, tossed into a bin with old cords and magazines. Its wing chipped, its smile faded. I held it like it was made of glass, because it was. I walked to Nolan's room and stood at the doorway. He was shaving, humming something tuneless, as if the world wasn't shifting beneath his feet. He saw me in the mirror. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer. I just held up the angel. He blinked. "Oh, Kara thought it was junk." Junk. That word said everything. I placed it on the hallway table, centered and proud, because some memories aren't decorations. They are witnesses. That evening, I heard the plates clinking before I smelled the food. I walked downstairs, curious. I hadn't cooked. The table was set for 4. Kara was lighting candles. Nolan stood beside her, uncorking wine. Across from them sat a young couple, laughing, their eyes darting around the room like buyers touring a model home. The woman whispered, "It's even better in person." No one looked at me. Not right away. When they finally did, it was Kara who spoke. "Oh, Mom, didn't think you'd be up. This is Michael and Dana. They're interested." Interested. I looked at the plates. There wasn't one for me. Not even a folded napkin. Nolan said nothing. He just poured the wine and passed it to the guests. The woman turned to me with a polite smile and asked, "Is this your home?" I opened my mouth, but I didn't know how to answer. Because what do you say when the home you built, the walls you scrubbed with your own hands, the meals you cooked every day for 30 years, is being presented like a prize you no longer qualify to keep? I smiled gently, nodded, and turned back up the stairs. I didn't cry, but in my room I sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of laughter below, and I realized the worst part wasn't losing the house. It was being erased from its story while still living inside it. The next morning, I found it by the door. A suitcase, new, burgundy, zipped, neatly placed beside a small folder labeled Brookside Condo, Move-In Packet. I hadn't packed it. I hadn't agreed to anything. But there it sat, as if my decision had already been made for me, as if I were a visitor waiting for her ride, not the woman who had scrubbed these floors with vinegar and hope. I stood there for a long time, robe tied tight around me, heart quiet, not from calm, but from exhaustion. Betrayal has a way of silencing even the loudest parts of your soul. Nolan walked in from the kitchen holding coffee. He saw me standing beside the suitcase and didn't flinch. "It's just easier this way," he said. "You'll have your own space. No stairs. Brookside's beautiful." Beautiful. He said it like a bribe, like a consolation prize. I didn't answer. I bent down slowly, opened the suitcase. Inside were clothes I hadn't worn in years. Old, plain, nothing of value. Like I was being packed in memory, not love. At the bottom, my wedding ring box. Empty. I looked up at him. Finally met his eyes. And what I saw there wasn't hatred. It was dismissal. As if I were a project completed, a duty fulfilled, a chapter closed. I closed the suitcase gently. And in that click of the zipper, something inside me broke in a way I knew I'd never show him. But one day, he'd feel it too. That afternoon, I sat on the porch steps, suitcase still inside, unopened since morning. I held the house phone, a landline no one used anymore, in my lap like an old friend I'd neglected. Something told me to check it. 3 messages, 2 from a pharmacy. 1 from someone I hadn't heard in months. "Hi, Marigold, it's Father Thomas. I ran into your neighbor, Jean. She mentioned some changes at your house. If you need someone to talk to, or just some peace, the church is always open. Call me anytime." His voice, kind, calm, the kind of voice that knows the difference between silence and surrender. I hadn't spoken to him since my husband's funeral. I stopped going to church regularly, not out of loss of faith, but because no one looked me in the eye after I stopped smiling. I sat with that message, replayed it, not because of what he offered, but because someone had remembered me, by name. Later that evening, I found Jeanne out by her mailbox. I waved. She walked over. Her eyes scanned my face like a woman reading a weathered map. I heard, she said gently. I didn't ask what she'd heard. She reached into her cardigan pocket and handed me a small folded envelope. I think you might need this. Inside, the spare key to her house. In that moment I felt something shift, not loudly, not dramatically, but like a match being struck in the dark. I wasn't alone. That night I opened my Bible, not to read, but to breathe. I had tucked Kara's to-do list inside it weeks ago, intending to remember. But tucked behind that list, folded and worn, was something else. A letter. Not my husband's. Mine. One I had started but never finished. Written years ago on the back of an electric bill. My handwriting was uneven, rushed. I must have written it after one of Nolan's first visits home, when the change in him was still new. Sharp edges where warmth used to be. It began. To my son. There's something you should know before this house belongs to you. But I'd never continued. Maybe I was afraid of sounding bitter. Or maybe I still believed he'd come back to himself, the way a child returns to a forgotten toy, with joy, with apology. But now, reading that unfinished line, I saw it clearly. The letter wasn't meant to warn him. It was meant to warn me that a day might come when I'd have to choose between letting go quietly or standing my ground with grace. I picked up a pen, not to threaten, not to beg, but to finish what I had started, because stories don't get stolen when you hold the pen. And this next chapter would be written by me. No revisions, no approval needed, just truth in my own hand. The next morning I walked to the bus stop. Not out of pride, I still had my license, but because I needed the silence. I needed to sit among strangers and feel invisible in a way that didn't hurt. I held the documents from the safe in my handbag, tucked between a scarf and a tin of mints. My husband's letter, the deed, his instructions. The office was small, quiet. The name on the door, Elaine Hartwell, attorney at law. Elaine had known my husband, had drafted his will. She looked up when I walked in, eyes widening in gentle surprise. "Marigold," she said, standing. "I was wondering when you'd come." I sat. My hands shook slightly as I passed her the envelope. She read, then looked up. "Has Nolan seen any of this?" I shook my head. He thinks I don't remember anything. He thinks he can move me out before I ask questions. Elaine sighed. "Your husband was clear. The house is yours, in full. Nolan has no legal claim. He knew that. He was there when the documents were signed." I blinked. "He knew?" She nodded. "Years ago. The betrayal wasn't fresh. It was premeditated." Elaine leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "You're not powerless, Marigold. You never were. Would you like me to send a notice?" I breathed in deeply, and for the first time in months, I said without hesitation, "Yes." I placed it on the table at exactly 7:12 p.m. Nolan was in the kitchen reheating leftovers. Kara was upstairs, humming along to some podcast, unaware that everything was about to change. The envelope was thick, official. My name was in the top corner. Elaine's signature at the bottom. Notice of ownership retention. A formal, quiet declaration. "This house is mine. You will not erase me." When Nolan walked in, he barely glanced at it. "What's this?" "Something you forgot," I said softly, returning to my chair. Calm, unshaken. He opened it, read the first line. His mouth parted, not in apology, in calculation. "I don't understand," he murmured, though we both knew he did. "You're saying this is yours?" I didn't respond, because the paper already had. He looked at me like a man realizing the checkmate was already on the board, and he had just now noticed the queen. "You went to a lawyer?" I nodded once. "The same one who helped your father, the same one who saw you sign the witness sheet." He dropped into the chair across from me. The silence between us was different now, not heavy with dismissal, but with recognition. For the first time, he saw me as something he hadn't in years. A woman with power. Not loud, not angry, just certain. And that was enough to make him look away. Kara came downstairs later than usual, dressed in her sharpest blouse, makeup perfect, as if she were still preparing for a future that no longer existed. She stopped when she saw the envelope on the table. The same one Nolan had left there, still open, like a warning or a wound. She picked it up, read it, then looked at me, not with confusion, with fury, dressed as a smile. "Wow," she said, voice stretched thin. "You really went through all that trouble, just to stay in a place like this?" She gestured around the room like it was dust and cobwebs, not the cathedral of my memories. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. She stepped closer, lowering her voice, sugar in her tone, vinegar beneath. "You think this changes things? You think he's going to suddenly turn back into the sweet little boy who called you Mama? He doesn't need this house, Marigold. He's going places." I met her eyes, finally, and said, with a calm that unsettled her, "Then let him go." She blinked, because in that moment she saw what Nolan hadn't, the quiet strength of a woman who no longer needed to be needed. I turned away, back to my chair by the window. She stood there for a few seconds longer, clutching a piece of paper that had undone months of manipulation, and then she walked upstairs, slower than usual, like someone who had just learned the floor was no longer hers. For 2 days, they barely left their room. No laughter, no footsteps echoing down the hallway. Just the occasional door creak, the flush of running water, whispers too soft to understand, the sound of a plan unraveling. And I moved through the house like it belonged to me again. I made tea and let it steep too long. I opened the windows and let the autumn wind brush against the curtains Kara once called outdated. I played my husband's old records, softly, not to disturb, but loud enough to remind the walls of what home used to feel like. They didn't come down for dinner, not once. And they didn't step into the living room again, because now that room, the one they once remodeled in their minds, no longer belonged to them. I took my time restoring what they'd tried to erase. The rocking chair was returned by Jean, bless her. She had found it at a local thrift shop, bought it back without asking, and placed it on my porch with a note. Some things are too sacred to sell. I wept when I sat in it again, not loudly, just enough. That evening, I lit a candle beside the fireplace. My wedding photo, returned from the guest room drawer, sat in its rightful place. And I knew. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just remains, where others tried to remove it. It was late. The kind of hour when only truth dares to knock. Nolan appeared at my door, leaning against the frame like he used to when he was 10 and afraid of thunderstorms. But there was no storm now, at least not outside. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, hands in his pockets, mouth opening, then closing. I didn't offer him a seat. He looked around my room, the same room he'd tried to clear out. His gaze paused at the rocking chair, then the photo on the dresser, then the letter on the nightstand with my name and my husband's writing. "I didn't think you'd actually fight," he said finally, quiet. My response came slow but steady. "That's because you stopped seeing me." He looked down. I thought you were tired, that maybe it would be easier." "Easier for who?" I asked. The silence after that was the deepest one yet. Not angry, not cold, just honest. He stepped into the room, barely, like a child unsure if he was welcome. His eyes were red, though he hadn't cried. "I don't know how to come back from this," he whispered. I didn't rush to answer, because sometimes letting someone feel the distance they created is the only way they'll truly see it. He turned to leave, but paused. "Do you hate me?" I looked at him and answered with the gentlest truth I had left. "No, but I've stopped waiting for you." 3 days later, I called the locksmith, not out of spite, out of necessity. The man arrived in the afternoon, polite, quiet, didn't ask questions. He replaced the front lock and handed me 2 new keys. I slipped one into the drawer beside my Bible, the other into my pocket. When Nolan returned from a walk, he tried the old key. It didn't turn. He stood on the porch, rattling the knob, confusion on his face. I opened the door slowly. We stood there, mother and son, with nothing but a threshold between us. "You changed the lock," he said. "Yes," I replied. He didn't ask why. He knew why. I stepped aside just enough to let him in. He walked past me without a word, but the silence between us was no longer passive. It had weight, a boundary, a truth. Kara came down the stairs holding a suitcase. She didn't make a scene, just looked at me with a mixture of bitterness and reluctant respect, like a woman who underestimated the quiet strength of someone she thought was fading. "I'll send for the rest," she said. I nodded. She walked out. Nolan followed, but at the door he turned, not to apologize, but to linger, as if searching for a version of me he'd left behind. "She was right," I said softly. "Brookside is beautiful. You'll like it." The door clicked shut behind them, this time by my hand. That evening I moved the rocking chair, not back to the shadowed corner where it had always been, but near the window where the sun reached in during late afternoons, golden and soft like old music. I sat there, wrapped in a shawl that once belonged to my mother, and watched the lights spill across the floor like forgiveness. The house was quiet now, not empty, just honest. No voices plotting behind closed doors, no perfume invading my room, no lists written without my name, just the creak of wood under my weight and the sound of birds outside. A song I hadn't noticed in weeks. I picked up my knitting again. Stiff at first, but my fingers remembered. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore, and for the first time, that thought didn't make me ache. It made me feel free. I turned slightly, looking towards the hallway. There, near the baseboard, was a small smudge, white paint from the wall Nolan had started and never finished. I didn't clean it. I left it there. Not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder, people will try to repaint your life, cover your truth with bright colors and silence. But some marks, some battles, deserve to stay visible. I smiled softly to myself, not out of pride, but because I knew the house was mine again, and not just the walls, the peace inside them too. The next morning, I placed the new spare key on the porch table, not hidden, not labeled, just there, in plain view, beside a small pot of marigolds I had planted the night before. The gesture wasn't an invitation. It was a symbol, a quiet message to the world, and maybe to Nolan if he ever came back. You may leave, but this house remains, and so do I. I watered the flowers slowly, the soil rich, the blooms still waking up to the light. They were my namesake after all, bright, resilient, modest, like me. I sat with my tea and let the morning carry itself. No plans, no whispered fears, just the birds again, and the warmth of the cup between my palms. At some point, Joan from next door waved. I waved back, and I realized I was no longer waiting for someone to come save me. I had done it myself, in my time, in my way. That key on the table? It wasn't for Nolan, not really, it was for me. A promise. You will never be locked out of your life again. I leaned back in the rocking chair, its rhythm steady now, reassuring, and the marigolds rustled in the breeze, holding their place, blooming despite everything. A week later, the same envelope I'd once received, cream-colored, cold, came back. But this time, I was the one sending it. I walked to the post office myself. No fanfare, no hesitation, just placed it gently on the counter and watched the clerk stamp it. Inside, the check Nolan had given me, untouched, unwanted, along with a single note, handwritten, folded once. You cannot buy the house your mother built with her bones. You cannot buy back respect once you've sold it. I didn't write my name, because if he still needed reminding who I was, then no signature could teach him. As I stepped out into the crisp fall air, I felt something lift from my chest. Not bitterness, but release. I wasn't punishing him, I was reminding myself that forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it means drawing a line in soft ink and stepping back, letting time do its quiet work, letting the ones who left feel the echo of your absence. Back home, I tucked a copy of the letter into my Bible, right beside the old photograph of us on the porch, when love still lived between us like breath. And I whispered, not in anger, but in peace, "May you remember me with truth." The days passed gently, morning light on the kitchen tiles, the sound of birds returning to the trees, the quiet creak of the rocking chair, my only witness. I began noticing things I had forgotten, the smell of toast, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the way the sunlight hit the photo frames around 4 p.m. each day, as if to say, "You're still here." Nolan didn't call. There was no apology, no visit. At first that absence stung, like salt rubbed into an old bruise. But then it began to settle, not as abandonment, but as space to think, to heal, to breathe. I found myself humming again, watering the marigolds twice instead of once, reading books I had left untouched during the months of quiet war. And one evening, as the sky turned that soft, forgiving blue, I lit a candle and said my husband's name aloud for the first time in weeks, not in sorrow, but in gratitude, because he had seen this coming. He had left me the tools, the words, the truth, and I had found my way back because of it. I stood at the front door that night looking out, waiting for no one, and still I smiled. Because healing, I realized, doesn't always come with hugs or closure. Sometimes it simply arrives in the form of a locked door, and the peace of knowing it no longer needs to open. One morning I heard a car pull up, slow, hesitant. I peeked through the curtain, careful not to be seen. It was Nolan. He stood by the gate, looking older than I remembered. Not in years, but in weight. His shoulders slumped, his hands deep in his pockets like a boy again. He didn't approach the door. He stood there for a while, just staring at the porch, the windows, the marigolds now in full bloom. And then he turned, got back in the car, and drove away. He never knocked. He didn't have a key anymore. And I didn't open the door, not out of vengeance, but because sometimes growth means protecting your peace, even from those you love. I stood there long after he left, not with a heart hardened by pain, but with one softened by survival. I wasn't angry anymore, I was clear. This home wasn't just a structure of walls and memories. It was earned. Every meal, every quiet night, every tear cried into the pillow. Every moment I stayed when it would have been easier to leave. The door stayed closed, and yet for the first time in years I felt wide open. To joy, to stillness, to me. I stepped out onto the porch, rocked gently in the chair and whispered to the breeze, "You came to take." But life gave me back more. The marigolds bloomed louder than anything ever said in that house. Bright, defiant, golden. Each petal reaching toward the sky like a small rebellion. Not of anger, but of survival, of claiming space, of thriving where it once seemed impossible. I spent mornings with them now, watering them gently, whispering little nothings like prayers. My husband used to say marigolds were stubborn flowers, growing where others wouldn't dare to try. "I suppose that makes you a marigold too," he once teased, brushing dirt from my cheek. He was right, because here I stood, not bitter, not broken, but rooted. Not everything was fixed. There were still days when the silence stung, when the echo of my son's laughter haunted the hallway. But even pain, when given enough light, begins to bloom into something softer, something you can live with. I placed a new photograph on the mantle, just me and the marigolds. No caption, no frame too fancy, just truth. And behind that photo, I tucked one last note, sealed and handwritten. This home stood because I did. Let the next woman who finds this know she's not alone. Then I lit the candle. The same one Kara once said it didn't match the decor, and I let it burn all night, because light like that doesn't need permission to stay. That final evening, I didn't close the curtains. I left the porch light on, not for anyone returning, but as a symbol. A quiet declaration that the woman inside no longer lived in fear of shadows. The house finally was still, but not empty. Each room carried echoes of something sacred, survival. Not the loud kind, but the kind made of small choices, to stay, to speak, to remember, to protect. I poured one last cup of tea and sat by the window, the candle flickering beside me. Outside, the marigolds stood tall, their petals holding the moonlight like a blessing. In the corner of the room, the Bible remained open, the letter from my husband safely tucked within. The rocking chair creaked once as I leaned back, not in age, but in peace. This was no longer a story of loss. It was a story of reclamation, of a woman who had been called outdated, erased, and unnecessary, yet chose to remain, to outlast the disrespect, to rebuild her dignity not through revenge, but through grace. As I sat there, the night wrapped around the house like a soft shawl, and the light, my light, stayed on. Because respect isn't inherited, it's earned day by day, and this home, this life, this peace had finally been earned.